I would call myself a creationist, but I'm different from other creationists. I don't try to disprove evolution or the Big Bang. I accept those facts. What I try to prove is that God banged the Big Bang and that he used evolution as a tool to get to his desired results. The creation theory in its current state can't even be called a theory anymore. The reason other scientists will laugh at creationists is simple. Because we just ignore a lot of science that disproves our theory, instead of accepting the facts that have been presented to us and modifying our theory. I want all creationists to hear this, so any atheist that is listening, please spread this to every creationist you know. Any creationist who is willing to listen. We need to start saying that the 6 days of creation don't necessarily have to be 24-hour days. Because as anyone who knows their Hebrew knows, the word yom doesn't have to refer to a 24-hour day. Let me read from Psalms. I believe it is Psalms 94. That's Psalms chapter 90, verse 4. For you 1,000 years are as yesterday. They are like a few hours. And let's also read from 2 Peter 3:8. Here it is. But you must not forget, dear friends, that a day is like 1,000 years to the Lord. 1,000 years like a day. So, looking at those two verses, we could easily assume that the days of creation could have been anywhere from 6 24-hour days to 6,000 years. It is most likely that the Earth didn't even start spinning until the 4th day of creation, so the 24-hour day wouldn't even come into play until after the 4th day of creation. Because in the first day, he puts light into existence and separates light from darkness. And the second day, he puts a space between the waters above and the waters below, called the space sky. And the third day, he plants plants. It's not until the 4th day that he brings light to separate day from night, and signs to mark off the seasons, days, and years. Puts the stars in the heavens and separates the light from the darkness. So the 24-hour day really didn't even come into play until after the fourth day of creation. So the 6 days of creation aren't necessarily 6 24-hour days. They're probably more or less a little over 4,000 years. And God probably rested for anywhere from 24 hours to 1,000 years. Because like I read in those verses, 1,000 years is like a day to God. So the 6 days of creation aren't necessarily the creation of all life on earth. They're more or less God putting the building blocks of life in place so that life can later on evolve into the existence that we know it is now. So where would that billion-year gap come into play? It would come into play after the second chapter of Genesis, while man is still in the Garden of Eden. Because no one knows how long Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden. And let me prove to you how Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are not contradictions to each other. Genesis 1 is a record of the 6 days of creation. And then Genesis 2 comes in and accounts for his day of rest, which could have been about 1,000 years actually, because 1,000 years is like a day to God. So, when God plants the garden, he takes plants he's already created. If you read the verse in its original Hebrew, he's taking plants from elsewhere on the earth. He's not creating new plants. Nor is he creating new animals in Genesis 2. He is taking animals that he's already created and bringing them to Adam. That's what it says in the Hebrew tense. It says, starting from verse 19, so the Lord formed from the soil every kind of animal and bird. He brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And Adam chose a name for each one. He formed the animals. That's past tense. Anyone who knows past tense can tell you that formed is not the same as created. The animals had already been created. So in fact, Genesis 2 is not a contradiction to Genesis 1. So that gap would come into play while
the